So we will first start by acknowledging that ONLIT's work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories. We acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. We are thankful to be able to work on this land, and we are thankful to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people for their care for and teachings about the earth. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities to our relationships and to the ancestral lands on which we work, learn, work, and live. We are so glad you've joined us this morning. We are anticipating a large crew. There was almost 1,000 people who registered to join us today, and we're just so looking forward to spending the morning with you. We know it is some of the last beautiful moments of the summer before everything changes pretty soon, so we're thankful you're here. Just in terms of a roadmap of what you can expect today, we'll start kicking it off with a little bit of a welcome and some housekeeping. I will walk you through what exactly are embedded mnemonics, what the research is behind them, why we thought it would be a great idea for ONLIT to make some, and why we hope that they can be something that can be helpful to support you in your work with students. We'll walk you a little bit through our process, what we were thinking about and what we prioritized when we were choosing keywords and trying to decide how the mnemonics would actually, what they would look like. I will introduce them to you. I will show you every letter and every picture that we have, and then we will welcome some contributions from two wonderful people, wonderful members of our ONLIT teacher team, who will walk through how they plan to be using them this year in their classrooms. We will wrap up and we will launch the mnemonics. So they will be in the resource library on the website. We will let you know when they're live. We will put the link in the chat. Just in terms of how we'll run today's webinar, if you do have any questions specific to the mnemonics, you should see a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to drop your questions in there instead of the chat. Sometimes if it's an especially active chat, questions can get lost. So we will happily, if there are any questions that pop up, we will happily answer those when we wrap up at the end. Well, my name's Una Malcolm. I am the project lead for ONLIT, and I am thrilled to be spending the morning with two fabulous members of our team, Melissa Manette-Smith, who teaches grade 1 in York Region District School Board, and Kate Wynn, who teaches kindergarten in Peterborough, Victoria, Northumberland, Clarington Catholic District School Board. And when we were thinking about how we wanted to release these tools, we knew right off the bat that we really wanted to hear from wonderful educators who could walk through how they see these mnemonics and these tools supporting them in their practice. If you are new to ONLIT, we are a joint project from Dyslexia Canada and IDA Ontario, International Dyslexia Association Ontario. And our role and our mission really is to support educators with the revised language curriculum. We prioritize research-driven practice. Our goal really is to bridge that research to practice gap in order to support evidence-based reading instruction and strong student literacy outcomes. So to put that in practice today, you'll learn a little bit about some of the research supporting embedded mnemonics, and then also a bit more about practice and how these can be used in instruction. We really view that it is an honor and a privilege for us at Dyslexia Canada and IDA Ontario to do this work, and we are thrilled to be able to support in whatever way we can. Like all things on ONLIT, the mnemonics you're about to see today are free, they're open source, they are available for anybody to use in anywhere that they could possibly need. And the reason we are able to do this and to have them as open source is thanks to funding from the Ontario Ministry of Education. And we really appreciate that because it allows us to do neat things and to help support Ontario educators. Please note, though, that the views expressed today are the views of ONLIT and do not necessarily reflect those of the Ministry of Education. Let's get started. We will first unpack embedded mnemonics. What are they? Why did we make them? And why do we think that they might be something that you may want to consider using in your instruction? So the name really is a mouthful, embedded picture mnemonics. It's a complicated word, it's a complicated name, and I think probably the best bet is just to start and unpack this a little bit, just to make sure we're all starting from the same shared knowledge base. So when we think of that term mnemonic, we'll start at the end and work our way to the beginning. A mnemonic really is a memory aid. It is a scaffold to support retention and recall. When I was thinking about that word mnemonic, I was thinking about high school French, and I was thinking about Dr. and Mrs. Vandertramp, that mnemonic to help remember the auxiliary verbs for passé composé. So really thinking about that structure or scaffold to support memory and retention. In this case, the scaffold is actually a picture that helps students associate a sound and a letter. So it helps them see a letter and then associate it with the sound that that letter represents. And again, in this case, that picture is directly embedded within the picture. So it's not necessarily a card where we've got a picture of a cow and then the letter C. It is something where the picture is directly embedded within the letter. So here is a lovely example. This is one of our mnemonics for the letter M. The rationale for this is that students see, oh, there's the letter M. That keyword is mittens, and that is embedded directly into the letter to help students say, oh, M, that's for mittens. The sound is right? It's directly connected and acts as a wonderful scaffold to support that really important foundational understanding for students. Linnea Ehri has done a lot of the research in this space, and she really beautifully puts it, she says that the link, this sort of embedded link, makes it possible for learners to look at a bare letter and remember its sound because the letter's shape reminds them of the object, its name, and the initial sound in the name. So really something where we're purposefully selecting and constructing these scaffolds to support students when they're beginning to learn the links between letters and sounds. And embedded mnemonics, I know we often, if you've read Anita Archer's work, you will often hear her say, teach the stuff and cut the fluff. And at the outset, it might seem like an embedded mnemonic is fluff, right? It might seem like it's extraneous pictures that could be distracting, could, amplify cognitive load. But I think it is really important to recognize that there is a lot of research support for this. And this obviously was why we felt that it was something that was important for ONlit to work on. So I will just briefly take you through a little bit of the research on embedded mnemonics, just so that way we can all agree that it's a research-supported practice that is something we should absolutely consider. So you'll notice the date on this research. This study was one of the seminal studies that examined embedded mnemonics. And in this case, students, grade 1 students, were taught 5 letter sound links, and they were taught in one of 3 different ways. The first way was, you can see an embedded mnemonic. So you can see that that flower is built directly into that letter F. The letter F kind of looks like a flower. So that was one condition. A second condition was a keyword of a flower. So a picture of a flower, right? And that was the keyword flower, F like flower. And then the third condition was no image, but just a keyword, F is flower. And then what Dr. Ehri found was that when these grade 1 students were taught those 5 letter sound correspondences, the embedded mnemonics embedded mnemonics supported students in learning many more letter sound correspondences. So there was amplified increased learning when those embedded mnemonics were used. Another interesting study was conducted with English-speaking 5-year-olds, and they were taught 10 Hebrew characters and their associated sounds. So students, language learners. And you can see here, I know it's a little grainy, but I pulled this right from the article. You can see that, in one of the conditions was the character and the sound it represented directly embedded. And then the other was a keyword, right? That same keyword, house and house, but not directly embedded in the character. And what the researchers found is that the mnemonic letters were learned faster. So it took fewer trials, less instruction to reach proficiency. They were less likely to be confused. So students were more accurate with their letter sound knowledge. They were remembered better after a delay. So after the study was done, they returned back and tested again, and mnemonic letters were retained more. And most importantly, I would say mnemonic letters were more likely to support stronger reading and writing, which ultimately is our end goal. And then the last study I'll walk you through was a really interesting one that focused on students with special education needs. And it used a multiple baseline design where individual student skills are measured repeatedly over time with really short, quick probes multiple times. So in this study, 3, 6, and 7-year-old students with learning disabilities were taught consonant letter sounds using picture mnemonics. And their letter sound knowledge was measured repeatedly before the intervention. That served as a baseline. And each student was individually moved into the intervention at a different time. So this allowed researchers to compare changes in their skills between baseline and intervention for each student individually. And this gives us a really interesting way to closely analyze individual cases. So I'll show you some graphs and I'll show you what they found. So you can see here, this is the graph of one student. And you can see those, you can see those 5 first data points are the baseline. So this is the number of letter sounds that this child knew before the intervention started. And this vertical line represents when that embedded mnemonic intervention started, right? So when they started the instruction. And you can see how that child's phonics knowledge increased after that intervention was put in place. And you can also see the follow-up scores, a delayed retest. So this was the first student that was moved into intervention. And you can see the second student, they have a longer baseline, right? Those data points show that the first child was moved to intervention, this second student stayed in baseline for a bit longer, and then they were moved into intervention. And you can see how their scores improved. And then the third student, again, has the longest baseline, still having those really quick checks of letter sound knowledge, and then the intervention being applied. And again, seeing that student growth in the letter sound correspondences for consonants that the child knows. So really summing it all up, I think it's interesting to recognize that, the research has worked with typically developing students, students who are language learners, students with special education needs. And Tim Shanahan really clearly summarizes it when he says that embedded mnemonic pictures can reduce the amount of repetition needed for kids to learn the letters and sounds with less confusion, better long-term memory, and greater ability to transfer or apply this knowledge in reading and spelling. And again, that's the ultimate goal, right? We want to see students being able to use these scaffolds to build proficiency in their letter sound knowledge, which ultimately will help them to read and write, which is what we all care a lot about. So I think, with this, we've sort of scratched the surface a little bit on some of the research on mnemonics, but I think it's important to consider at what point should we consider using these for what students, at what point in their instruction and their literacy development. So I want to show you 2 frameworks that I think might help in this decision making, again, recognizing that this is a professional decision about when this might be an important piece to add to instruction. So we'll walk briefly through the instructional hierarchy. And this is a framework. You can see it's not a new framework, but it's a framework that was identified in the research several decades ago, but has been replicated for decades. And this is it's a predictable structure or framework that we go through when we learn something new. I'm most often focused on academic learning, but also I think it's probably a safe bet to think that this would be applicable if you're learning to play the violin or the piano, if you're learning a new skill when you're playing basketball. So the first stage really in this instructional hierarchy is acquisition, right? Thinking about when we're learning a new skill, we need to build accuracy and we need to be able to do that skill. And the acquisition phase in the instructional hierarchy is really characterized by effortful, inaccurate performance, right? So thinking about our students, this acquisition phase is when we're teaching something brand new and we really just want them to build accuracy with it. With accuracy in place, though, this instructional hierarchy then shifts to fluency building, right? Once we have a skill that we are accurate with, we then need to be able to be automatic and fluent with it, to be able to do it quickly and accurately. And that's the next stage or the next phase of the instructional hierarchy. And when we are able to do something accurately and fluently, it is then that we can generalize it and adapt it and use it in different contexts. And that really is that piece where once we have that acquisition, we have that fluency, that is what allows somebody to use a skill, to apply it, to adapt it based on how they need to use it in a different context. So if we think about embedded mnemonics, to me, they serve as a really important scaffold that can support the acquisition of new skills and new knowledge. So really thinking about it of new letter sound correspondences, and they can act as an important way to support student learning when they're doing that difficult work of acquiring that foundational knowledge. And then also we can think about it in terms of Linnea Ehri's phases of word reading development. She has 4 phases that are often referred to, and we really, are conceptualizing these mnemonics for students in that partial alphabetic phase. So these are often students in kindergarten or grade 1, could be older students who still haven't yet built proficiency at that piece. They might know letter names, some letter sounds, but they need systematic instruction, systematic explicit instruction in how those letters represents the sounds of our language. So really thinking about that partial alphabetic phase. So we've built a lot of knowledge about what embedded mnemonics are, some of the research supporting their use, and a little bit about where they might fit into instruction or for which students are at what point. And I did want to take a few moments and just walk you through some of how these mnemonics were created and some of the considerations we made when we were choosing keywords, because that certainly is a really important element of this resource. This was a really iterative process with a lot of back and forth. We really wanted to make sure we got it right. And if you've come to an ONlit event before, you've probably met me or Alicia or MJ or members of our wonderful teacher team, but there are fabulous people who I think might be on this call today. So if they are, thank you. But there are fabulous people behind the scenes who do incredible work to make sure that we can make wonderful things that I hope will ultimately be helpful for you in your classrooms. So a very, very, very big thank you to the people behind the scenes who made this all happen. Melissa Mercer, our project manager, Selena Fisher, who is the creative director for this project, and Jody Sandler, who did what I think you'll agree are really remarkably lovely illustrations and animations. And also we had some students test as well. We wanted to make sure that we got the keywords right. So these wonderful people had a lot to do with what you're about to see today. So in order to make these mnemonics really, really well, which was what we wanted to do, we really needed to take a step back and think, what is it that students actually need to do, right? Like how we know they're an effective, when they're used, we know it's an effective practice, but what is it that students need to be able to do to be able to use that to support their learning? So thinking about it, if a student is looking at a mnemonic, they need to first identify that keyword, right? That picture. They need to be like, oh, those are mittens, right? They need to be able to see that picture and identify what that vocabulary word is. Then they need to segment off that first sound, right? They need to say, oh, that's a picture of some mittens. The first sound in mittens is right? And then once they have that, they can associate the letter and the sound. But when we were thinking about it, because all of this learning really rests on that first piece, that identifying the picture of the key word, we knew it was really, really, really important that we got it right. And we really purposefully tried to think very, very carefully about making sure we made the best possible choices for word choices as possible. So I'll tell you a little bit about some of the priorities that we had, and then maybe some of the words we chose and some of the words we thought maybe wouldn't be the best choice for this resource, for us at least. So the first thing we wanted to do, we really wanted to make sure that that target sound was in the initial position. It was the first sound in the word. So for example, we chose apple for short A. We did not choose hat for short A because in order to use hat, that would have required additional segmenting, right? Kids would have had to go hat as at to catch that in the medial or middle position. So we wanted to prioritize the initial position. We wanted to avoid consonant blends when talking about keywords for consonants. So we prioritized a word like banana over a word like brush. Again, recognizing that for banana, they just have to segment off that one consonant, whereas it's more challenging for early learners. And again, we're thinking about meeting the needs of early learners who are right at that acquisition stage. It's more challenging for them to split that blend. So we wanted to avoid consonant blends wherever possible. Does the word represent the target sound? That was a key priority for us. And that's something where if you look at some alphabet books on the market, some of the key words for those alphabet letters might not necessarily be directly aligned with the sound that we want kids to learn. So for example, we chose octopus for short O. You might see a word, you might see orange used in alphabet books, but we wanted something that really clearly had that short O, ah sound. So we chose octopus over orange. There are many other examples of this, but we really wanted to make sure if that goal is that short vowel sound, we want to make sure we're giving a keyword that is as close to it as possible. Again, this is something where students will phase out of this. This is not a scaffold that's used forever, but we wanted to make sure we're meeting the needs of very, very, very foundational skills for early learners. We wanted to make sure we were considering dialect and linguistic variation, recognizing that, our mandate is Ontario, and even within Ontario, there's incredible diversity in linguistic variation, right? Recognizing that oftentimes the way you pronounce things is related to where you live or your culture and your identity, and that's a good thing. It's not an error, it's not a problem, it's a good thing, and we wanted to be mindful of that. So for example, we chose echo for short E instead of egg, because depending on, where you live, you might pronounce that as egg, which again is not an error. It's just something we wanted that to be as close as possible. This was a really big one. We really, really, really prioritized wherever possible familiar vocabulary. We wanted, again, recognizing that the whole efficacy of these mnemonics hinges on that piece where they can look at a picture and say, oh, that's what this is. So we prioritized tier 1 words. We tested it with students. Melissa tested it. I tested it. We wanted to get student perspectives on whether they could instantaneously recognize it. So we chose worm for W instead of, some phonics programs will use wig. We figured worm was more concrete and kids were more likely to see them on the ground in the schoolyard versus something like wig, which might be a bit more abstract. So we really wanted to prioritize vocabulary words. And then we also wanted to make sure that the images were specific. We wanted to make sure that when students see a picture, it was as close to a one-to-one relationship between the picture and the word as possible. So for N, we chose net. Something like non would have been, certainly would have met other criteria, right? It's the initial position, there's no blend, but we thought that, students might have looked at it and said, oh, that's a pita, or that's a roti, or that's matzah, or a lafa, right? Making sure that wherever possible, students could identify, that picture correctly and isolate that keyword. And then this one's kind of a practical one that we realized more and more as we got into it. The key word, like that picture, needs to be able to look something like the letter. And that was something we realized where that was harder than I think we thought at the beginning. So we did choose net for N. Initially, we were considering nose, right? We thought that nose would be a really good keyword for N because, it's super familiar to kids and, it's very concrete and you can, but we could not wrap our minds around a way to make a picture of a nose look like a lowercase n. So that just was not necessarily something we could manage. So practically speaking, the keyword does sort of have to look a little bit like the letter itself. So as you can tell, there were many, many, many priorities that we kept in mind when we were choosing keywords. And because of that, we did have to make some compromises, right? There is no perfect word that can tick every single box. So we did have to make some compromises. There are some trickier ones. You'll notice when I walk you through the alphabet. Short I was really, really, really challenging. We did go with itch. That was our keyword choice. We wanted to stay away from some of the other words. It does mean that itch and actually E, short E, we used echo. It does mean that itch and echo are a little bit more abstract than some of the other word choices, but to us, that was a trade-off we were comfortable making because we wanted that sound to be, we were really prioritizing the sound. And for X, we chose box. So it's not in the initial position. It's at the end of box. And then I do know, many phonics programs they often prioritize using single syllable words. We found pretty quickly that if we were going to meet all those other criteria, if we were going to tick all those boxes, we could not keep it to just single syllable words. So a lot of the keywords are multisyllabic, but that was a trade-off we were comfortable with, recognizing that it met all of our other expectations. So there you can see is the lovely itchy, itchy, itchy eye, which while it is more abstract, I think, many kids have experienced the adventure of having a really, really itchy mosquito bite. So certainly something where I think it's teachable. So just recognizing that there might be words that you may sort of wonder, I wonder why they went with this. I can pretty much guarantee that a lot of really careful thought went into it, and there were some compromises, but I think the compromises ended up working out pretty awesome. So this is probably what you've been waiting for. Here's the big moment. I know there's been some sneak peeks on social. I know that Melissa Smith posted that she was hard at work yesterday with her sewing rotary cutter, cutting up little letter cards. So what I'll do here is I'll walk you through all the pictures, right? I'll walk you through the alphabet, and then I'll show you sort of what's to come, what files we have, like what you can get and print and download from the website. So we'll start with A. We have apple for A, and I'll just walk you through these. Apple for A, banana for B, cat for C, dinosaur for D. This was a hard one, and I'm thrilled with how it turned out. Echo for E. I can't imagine trying to illustrate how to make an E echo, so this looks awesome. F for fish. This was a tricky one. We really went back and forth about this. If you'll notice, the fish is diving into the water. We wanted to make sure, at first we were sort of thinking the fish would jump out of the water, but that we realized if somebody is doing an action of that, it would show the opposite formation pattern, right? When handwriting, we want kids to start at the top and move down. We don't want them to bottom start. So we made sure that the fish was jumping into the water, so that way it mimics the letter formation pattern. There was a lot of back and forth going on with this. So we've got the fish jumping into the lake. We've got goose for G. Got H for horse. We've got that itchy, itchy eye, which you've seen. We've got J, jelly beans. Key for K. A leaf for L. You've seen mittens here. We've got nets here for N. A very cute octopus for O. Pumpkin for P. Quarter for Q and U. And we were really careful with our font here. We wanted to make sure the Q had a hook, right? A lot of fonts, if you look at the Q, it just is a straight line down. But we wanted to make sure that Q had a little hook to it. We actually were very careful about the font. We wanted to make sure that it was a round A, and that we looked at the ascenders to make sure that the D was much taller than the A and the H was much taller than the N. We wanted to make it as clear as possible for kids. So this lovely Canadian quarter for QU. An R, road for R, sandwich for S. I think this one's really sweet. A tiger for T. An umbrella for U that goes the umbrella goes up. A volcano for V. A worm for W. I think this one might be my favorite. And a box for X. You'll notice again, this is the one with the sound in the final position. A yo-yo for Y, and a zipper for Z. So that's the alphabet. I think they are wonderful. They are lovely, I think. And I'm so excited. We're really focused on how we can translate these. And I know the chat is moving, and I think I don't know if Melissa and Kate are keeping an eye on that, but we'll dig back into that if there's anything that's popping up that we need to chat about at the end. But we really wanted to be mindful about what files we're making with these, like what would be helpful for educators to be able to print out and use with ease in their class. So the first one we thought about was, and let me make sure I pick up the right one, a half-page card where you have, let me see, yeah, you've got the mnemonic on one side, and then you've got the plain regular letter on the other side. And we wanted to do this because we wanted to be able to to be able to give educators the opportunity of fading that scaffold, right? Remembering in that instructional hierarchy, it's fine to give that scaffold. It's important to do that. And we want to build that early knowledge. But once they are accurate, once students are accurate, we want to be able to fade that out and give them that opportunity to work with that stimulus or that letter that looks most closely to what it would be if they were actually reading. So we have cards for those. They come 2 to a page, so you just need to print them and slice them down the middle. Preferably with a paper cutter and not with a rotary cutter like Melissa did last night. We would recommend against that. And then another card that we have is still that same half-page flashcard, but it has an instructional routine on the back. So that way you can hold it and your students can see it, and it gives you a little instructional routine about how you could introduce these to students. And that instructional routine might involve like saying the keyword, having students say the keyword, identifying that key sound segment or that first sound, segmenting it off, and then linking that sound to the letter itself. And in that instructional routine, we really prioritized active participation, signaling for that choral response, and giving students lots of opportunities to respond. So you will see those on the website as well. And then something else we wanted to add as well was the option to print with 8 of them to a page like this. So you get small, almost like card deck, like playing card size. And they are also double-sided. So they have the plain letter on reverse. And we wanted to do this to give the opportunity for educators to print them and then put them on a binder ring and send them home if families are looking for home practice. And we also wrote a sample letter for this as well with tips about how to use them to work with the child at home. So that will be on the site as well. And then we have, I don't have it printed here, but we did, something that our teacher team mentioned would be really helpful would be to have them on an 8.5 by 11 sheet. This might look different. We're thinking about making it 2-sided and then including printing scaffolds with like a starting point and arrows as well. So we'll see. But having a 1 page, so that way students either have it on their desk or on their table if your classroom has tables, or even stapled or glued into their notebooks. That way when they're spelling, if they need a reference, they have it there as well. So those are the print files. And then we are very excited that coming soon, the print files will be up today. We'll let you know, we'll get them up on the site and we'll let you know before you leave today when they're up. We will have animated videos coming as well, and those will be up. They're not quite ready yet, but they will be done before the beginning of the school year, the Ontario school year, I should say. We don't start till after Labor Day, so if you start earlier, it might be a little bit later. And we really wanted to make sure that these videos were not necessarily just a set it and forget it, right? Of here, I'm going to play this video for kids to watch, but really we wanted to structure the timing for explicit instruction. So we wanted to make sure that we could have those and then also, primarily have them be used to support that explicit instruction of teaching, this letter and how it's represented and also how it's formed. So I will show you a sample one. And what I'll do is I'll show you a little bit more about what this might look instructionally or how you could introduce it. So I'll teach the T. Let's see if this can work. There we go. Okay, so you see that really sweet tiger comes in and we could say something like, here's a tiger. Say tiger with me. Get ready. So we're cueing that active response. And then we could say the first sound in tiger is T. What's the first sound in tiger? Get ready. And again, cueing that choral response. Now we're shifting to the T. We can say yes, T is the first sound in tiger, and we spell T with the letter T. What letter spells T? Get ready, and having that choral response as well. Now we're signaling the handwriting formation. We start at the top, big line down, then little line across the middle. And then we see it one more time where we can have kids point, 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 ready, trace with me, big line down, little line across the middle. And then, hey, you did it, tiger. T spells T like tiger. So having this predictable structure of showing the mnemonic, fading to the letter, showing the handwriting formation once, showing the handwriting formation again. These, we will have one for every letter. We'll have them embedded in a playlist, and we'll also have them on slides so you can drop them into a slide deck. And, oops. There we go. Okay, with that, you will stop hearing from me for a bit and I will open the floor up to the wonderful Kate Wynn, who will chat a little bit about how she sees these being used in her kindergarten class this year.
Okay, thank you, Una. And thank you, Una, for spearheading all of this. And you need to take a minute to go look at the chat because it is just a love fest in there. And I'm sure you've been far too busy speaking to take a look at it. So you take a minute to look at everything that's coming through there. And I'm just going to quickly share some ideas for using this in kindergarten. So Melissa, who's going to speak after me, I'm sure would agree with me that we're not telling you how you have to use these in K1. We're just telling you some ways we have used embedded mnemonics, some ways we plan to use these with our students, but you don't need to, furiously scribble down, this is the way you must in kindergarten, just sharing some ideas. So I have been using embedded mnemonics in my kindergarten class for at least 3 years now. And if you've seen me, recommend the ones I had used previously, they're fine. I didn't steer you wrong, but of course they're nothing compared to these amazing ONlit ones that we have for us to use now. And I really love the research base behind them too, right? How Una mentioned that, teach the stuff, cut the fluff. Because there are some little parts of our instructional routines, I think some we're still kind of learning to let go that we don't know aren't necessarily research based, but we know that this piece is. And so I've really appreciated using them and using them as that scaffold. So what I've done in the past and what I will continue to do is introduce them in my phonics scope and sequence. So I happen to use UFly. And so as that letter and sound comes up in my scope and sequence, I'm going to embed the little video into the UFly slideshow. I've already made some little tweaks to them, but I will include that there. And then I'll bring it out again in the piece where we do the letter formation. And so it'll be shown when we introduce the letter and it'll be introduced there. So a great question in the chat, should this replace the visual drill? I would still use the print only visual drill. However, this is something else that you could add in. You could see who needs it and that sort of piece as well. I wouldn't use it to replace that, but it could be something else that you might want to do or might want to do with certain students. So I will be using it for that. Now, I always have a little password outside in the hallway. I haven't yet used the embedded mnemonic with the little password. I usually just have the print letter in the hall. And when kids are coming in and out, they tap it and they make that sound. I feel like having their peers saying it in front of them and having me standing right there is kind of scaffold enough for them to practice that. But I have seen people put the little embedded mnemonic with their password outside. And so that's certainly, teacher discretion if that's something that you think you might like to do. I will continue to just send home print letters first, but there will be students who might need these. So year 2 kids who have been through a year of phonics, I'll be assessing their letters and sounds at the start of the year. And if there happens to be, a kiddo who doesn't have them all consolidated yet, this will be a great scaffold and I will involve home as well. So we have, great options for things that you can send home to do with those students who will need it. Another way I have really taken advantage of embedded mnemonics is for games and availability during play. So games in whole group are a great way to introduce an activity that then kids may continue on with themselves when they're playing. So I have used embedded mnemonics for things like, little around the world kind of flashcard games. I have used them for sitting in a circle and putting them in the middle of the carpet and hiding something under it, maybe something seasonal, like where's the turkey, where's Spider-Man? And so the kids are guessing, like, is it under the ah? Okay, let's see. No, Spider-Man's not under the ah. Using those when the kids are first learning, especially with the year 1s. And then what I have found is if something just happens to still be sitting out, the kids will often take that and use it for games during play as well, which I often think is neat when they take something themselves that we have done in playtime and use them. I have used embedded mnemonics for intervention. So you could use them in small group. I think the last couple of years when I've used them, it's been with an individual in each case. And so if there are some letters and sounds that they know with print, you can flash the letter only and they can give you the sound. That's great. They don't need the embedded mnemonic for it anymore. But if there are some where they are still struggling to quickly name or to quickly produce that sound, then the embedded mnemonics can be really helpful. So I have used those and then weaned kids off, as you go, because really we want to keep remembering that it is that scaffold, right? Really important that the kids know the name of the word. So Una gave really good examples of like introducing these to the kids and all of the thought that went into having words that the kids would know. Because I know sometimes I would still have a kid, we'd be working, I'd flash that tiger T and he'd say, oh, and I'd say, why, oh, lion. Oh, no, that's not a lion, that's a tiger. But if when you introduce these and you're using them, the kids are all consolidating what these keywords are, in those mnemonics, then that will be really helpful to them. And sometimes they're just, making things up too. Like they'll see the A and they'll say, because it's fruit. No, we're going to use apple for this one, right? So a little bit of that loading is important because you don't want that working memory piece to be, or the retrieval piece to be the problem when you're trying to get these letter names going. So definitely make sure that the kids know what these words are if you're going to be using them for something like this. And then always just keeping in mind that scaffold. So I was thinking this morning about my daughters, and they're 18 and 16. And I was thinking about when we had the little Dora step stool in the bathroom for them to use to brush their teeth. And once they could actually reach and they didn't need it anymore, I didn't want to think, oh, well, it's so cute. And I, put this money into buying this and I like the way it looks in here. Let's just keep it. No, they do not need that anymore. Let's get it out of there. And, it'll be put to use for the next person who needs it. So it is a scaffold, so important, so research based, but you want to get it out of there as soon as kids can recognize the print, then you do not need it anymore. And those are some of my tips for kindergarten. And then I know we are moving to Melissa Manette Smith next to tell us some grade 1 ideas.
Yeah, and sort of bouncing off of where you started with the kindergarten, one other thing for kindergarten that I used them last year, having the cards at loose parts stations. So if you're doing loose parts in kindergarten, just having them there and seeing what the kids can create. In my board, we really talk about literacy throughout the day. It's definitely something that we focus on a lot. And like you mentioned, having the going in and out of the classroom. So I did not have a hole punch at home, but I was still able to make these, putting them on a ring. And, if you have it on a lanyard and you have it just next to you, going in and out of classrooms. As Kate said, these are really just a scaffold. And if your kids don't need them anymore, then we don't need to use them. One thing I was thinking, like going from kindergarten, so I was kindergarten last year and I'm grade 1 this year, bringing those into that grade 1 at the beginning of the year. A lot of kids going into grade 1 are quite nervous. It's a different environment. We're like, you're not in kindergarten anymore. Seeing some of the same resources being used in their grade 1 class can really help them feel more comfortable with what they're doing. As a parent, I know Jen in the chat there said when Una was going through the cards that, a child ran her kindergarten at home, ran right over. Just having these available for kids. They're two-sided, having the mnemonic on one side. There's so many different games, I Spy, lots of ways to be engaging that way. The cards that I've printed out here are the mnemonic on one side and then the script on the other. I don't know where you guys are at with your memories, but sometimes when I'm teaching, I cannot think of any words. I cannot think of what I need to say. And having that script on the back is really helpful. Una mentioned the writing supports. So I have printed them off in the 8.5 by 11 right here. These are great. I put them in you can buy those clear L-shaped displays. I put those in and the kids can just grab them and bring them over their tables when they're writing. I have a larger one. It also prints lovely on 8.5 by 11. Another support that you could do is with the notebook. So I have the notebook here. And when you open up the notebook, this is just a duotang, I have it just a smaller version taped so that when they are going to do their writing, they have it there as a support. And if they need to change their page, they can just flip it over top so that it's always there. Again, this is not necessarily required for all students, but for the students who do need that extra support, this brings up the independence level so high. They are able to do a lot themselves because we refer to these, and these visual cues help them figure out what letters, and then the independent writing skyrockets. And in kindergarten, when you've got so many of them and you're wanting them to write, even in grade 1, it's really helpful to give them the tools to do that independently. I worked in a self-contained special education classroom for several years, and these types of things where students, especially older students, don't necessarily have to ask for the support because it's right there for them, really helpful in gaining that independence. And one last sort of new toy that I have is on the iPad. So the iPad, I can connect directly to my smart board. I can project the letter, and then we can create student-generated lists. So right directly next to it, I can write. It's easier when I have it in front of me. I can write right next to it. These student-generated lists, again, really help bring the kids in to the learning, and they get really excited for it. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say. again, that YouTube playlist that is coming up in the slides, I am a bit of a low digital classroom. I do like having the paper things around me, but having that opportunity, just like Kate was saying about like taking the slides that you need and putting it into the instructional routine that you are already doing. That's what's really great about these cards, is that they are not their own program, but they are supportive of all programs that you might be using.
Melissa, could you just say one more time, how did you create the flip alphabet? Did you just tape it like that?
This one? No, I did not have a hole punch, so I used my drill.
What? I admire your ingenuity and your creative spirit. What did you do? I think she's meaning for the notebook inside, but I do appreciate
the notebook.
that you mentioned your, home hardware.
My home, we make do. I am a crafty girl. So for the duotang?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. So the duotang is literally, I just took a screenshot of the picture and printed it on half page, and then it's just packing tape. But what you want to make sure is that you leave a little bit of space here for, as the notebook gets thicker and thicker, they can always just flip it over the page. And you could do this with different supports too. So if you are, target words on this side, that can flip over. If there's some words that you're having them do that they need access to. And again, you can change this for each student. So if you have a student who requires more support, again, thinking about my special ed students who didn't have the same word retrieval that other kids might have had, being able to add the supports that they needed individually. Everybody has the same thing, but it is completely differentiated for what the kid needs.
With that, we are at 11:01. I would just like to thank everybody for joining us today. I was so looking forward to this webinar today because we've been really, really, really impatient to be able to launch these and put these out there and share these with the world. So we're so glad that they're out there. Please stay in touch if there are questions that pop up, if there are things we can do, additional print files that would be helpful for you as you gear up for a new school year. Don't hesitate to reach out. It is an absolute, we'd be happy to support in whatever way we can. And please, if you use these in your classroom, please let us know. Pop it on social, send us a picture. We love seeing how this hard work translates into Ontario classrooms, frankly, beyond Ontario, because we've got people from all over on this webinar today. So thank you all so much for joining us. And please keep us posted on how these work. And we are looking forward to staying in touch.